my uncle shouted. "You're not blood," but the will named me executor of the entire estate. I stood in the dimly lit living room of my late grandmother's house, the air thick with tension and the faint smell of her old lavender candles. My Uncle Richard's voice boomed across the room, his face red with rage. "You're not even blood, Haley," he spat, jabbing a finger at me. "You have no right to any of this." The words hit like a slap, and the room went quiet. My cousins, aunts, and uncles stared, some smirking, others shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The lawyer, Mr. Thompson, adjusted his glasses nervously, clutching a sealed envelope. Grandma's will. I could feel my heart pounding, my hands trembling as I tried to hold my ground. This wasn't just about money or the house. This was about everything I'd given to Grandma over the years, everything they'd ignored. And now, they thought they could erase me. The room felt smaller with every second, their eyes boring into me like I was an intruder. Richard's wife, Linda, leaned forward, her lips curling into a smug grin. "She's right to be here, Richard," she said, her tone dripping with fake sweetness. "Let's hear what the will says before we jump to conclusions." But I knew better. They'd been whispering for weeks, plotting to push me out. Grandma's estate, her house, her savings, her antiques, was worth over $2 million. They wanted it all. And I, the adopted granddaughter, was the easy target. I took a deep breath, my mind racing. How did it come to this? Grandma had been my rock, the one who raised me when my parents couldn't. I'd spent years caring for her, cooking her meals, driving her to doctor's appointments, while Richard and the others barely called. Yet here they were, acting like they deserved everything. I glanced at the lawyer, his hands fidgeting with the envelope. Whatever was in that will, I knew it would change everything. Hey, before we dive deeper into this family drama, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from, your country, your city. I'd love to know who's joining me in this wild ride. Now, let's get back to the story. Let me take you back to where it all started, to the years before Grandma's death when the cracks in our family first showed. Growing up in small-town Ohio, our family was tight-knit, at least on the surface. Grandma's house in Willow Creek was the heart of it all. A cozy two-story filled with memories of Sunday dinners and Christmas mornings. I was adopted at 5, after my parents, Grandma's daughter and her husband, passed in a car accident. Grandma took me in without hesitation, treating me like her own, but not everyone felt the same. My Uncle Richard, Grandma's eldest son, always looked at me like I didn't quite belong. "You're not blood," he'd mutter under his breath when I was a kid, thinking I didn't hear. His kids, my cousins Sarah and Jake, followed his lead, icing me out at family gatherings. They'd giggle behind my back or forget to invite me to their birthday parties. Aunt Linda, Richard's wife, was the worst. She'd smile to my face but whisper to Grandma about protecting the family legacy. Grandma always shut her down, saying, "Haley's as much mine as anyone." But those words stung, planting seeds of doubt that grew over the years. Then there was my cousin Emily, Aunt Susan's daughter. Susan was Grandma's youngest, and she was different, kind but distant, always busy with her own life. Emily, though, was my closest ally growing up. We'd spend summers exploring Grandma's attic, laughing over old photos. But even Emily drifted as we got older, caught up in her city job and new friends. When Grandma got sick 3 years ago, I was the one who stayed. I moved back to Willow Creek, took a part-time job at the local library, and spent my days making sure Grandma was comfortable. I'd read to her, help with her meds, even repaint her porch when it started peeling. Richard? He'd show up once a month, if that, always with an excuse about work. Sarah and Jake sent cards but never visited. Linda only came when she wanted to check on the house, eyeing Grandma's antiques like a hawk. I never asked for anything. I didn't do it for the money. I did it because Grandma was my world. She'd hold my hand and say, "Haley, you're my heart." Those moments kept me going. But as her health faded, the family started circling. Richard began asking about Grandma's finances, dropping hints about fair shares. Linda started calling more, offering to help with Grandma's care, though she never showed up. I overheard Sarah once on the phone saying, "Haley's probably angling for everything." It hurt, but I kept quiet. I thought love would be enough to prove my place. I was wrong. By the time Grandma passed, the tension was a ticking bomb. The family group chat, once full of birthday wishes, turned into a battleground. Richard demanded a meeting with the lawyer before the funeral. Linda texted about making sure everything's fair. Emily tried to stay neutral, but I could tell she was torn. Susan just stayed silent. I felt alone, like I was fighting a war I didn't start. All I had was Grandma's memory and a gut feeling that she'd never let them erase me. But as I stood in that living room, Richard's words echoing in my ears, I wasn't so sure. The funeral was held on a gray, drizzly morning at Willow Creek's only church, the same one where Grandma used to drag me for Sunday service. The pews were packed not just with family but with neighbors and old friends, all whispering about Grandma's life and her sizable estate. I sat in the front row, clutching a crumpled tissue, trying to focus on the pastor's words about Grandma's kindness. But the air felt heavy, like a storm was brewing. Richard and Linda sat 2 rows back, their heads bent together, murmuring. Sarah and Jake flanked them, scrolling on their phones, barely paying attention. Emily sat beside me, her hand brushing mine briefly, but even she seemed distracted, glancing at her parents across the aisle. As we moved to the graveside, the tension boiled over. Linda pulled me aside near the cemetery gate, her perfume sharp and overwhelming. "Haley, we need to talk about the house," she said, her voice low but firm. "It's a family asset, you know. It should stay with blood relatives." Her eyes flicked to Richard, who was watching us like a hawk. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "Grandma wanted me here," I managed to say, my voice shaking. Linda raised an eyebrow, smirking. "Did she? Or is that what you told yourself while you were playing nurse?" Before I could respond, she walked off, her heels clicking on the gravel. Back at Grandma's house for the reception, the mood was worse. The living room was crowded, the table piled with casseroles and sympathy cards. I caught snippets of conversation, Richard muttering about entitlements, Sarah whispering to Jake about Haley thinking she's special. I tried to stay busy, refilling coffee cups, but every glance felt like a jab. Then came the moment I dreaded. Richard stood up, clinking a spoon against his glass. "We need to honor Mom's wishes," he said loudly, his eyes locking on me. "But we also need to be fair. Some people might think they're owed more than they are." The room went silent, all eyes on me. I felt my face burn, my hands clenching into fists. Emily reached for my arm, whispering, "Ignore him." But it was too late. The humiliation stung deep. That night, after most of the guests left, I stayed to clean up, needing something to keep my hands busy. The lawyer, Mr. Thompson, lingered in the kitchen, sipping coffee and looking uneasy. I'd known him for years. He'd handled Grandma's taxes and even helped me with some paperwork when I moved back to Willow Creek. But today he was different, fidgeting with his tie, avoiding my eyes. "Haley," he said quietly, glancing toward the door to make sure we were alone. "There's something you should know about the will. It's complicated." My stomach dropped. "Complicated how?" I asked. He hesitated, then shook his head. "Just be at the reading tomorrow. You'll see." Before I could press him, Linda walked in, and he clammed up, excusing himself quickly. I couldn't sleep that night, replaying his words. Complicated? What did that mean? Grandma had always been clear. She wanted me taken care of. She'd even joked about leaving me her old record player, the one we'd danced to when I was a kid. But doubt crept in. What if Richard was right? What if Grandma's will left me nothing? The thought made my chest ache, not just for the money, but for what it would mean about our bond. The next morning, as I drove to Mr. Thompson's office, another strange moment hit me. Emily pulled me aside in the parking lot, her face pale. "Haley, I overheard Mom and Dad last night," she whispered. "They were talking about a letter Grandma wrote, something they didn't want you to know about." My heart raced. "What letter?" I asked. Emily bit her lip, glancing at Richard's car pulling in. "I don't know," but Mom sounded nervous. "Just watch out, okay?" Before I could ask more, she hurried inside, leaving me standing there, my mind spinning. At the office, the family gathered in a small, stuffy conference room. Richard sat at the head of the table, acting like he owned the place. Linda was next to him, her notepad out like she was ready to take inventory. Sarah and Jake slouched in their chairs, whispering to each other. Susan sat quietly, avoiding everyone's eyes. I took a seat near the door, feeling like an outsider in my own family. Mr. Thompson walked in, his briefcase heavy with papers. He cleared his throat, his hand shaking slightly as he pulled out the will. "Let's begin," he said, his voice unsteady. I caught a glance from Emily, her eyes wide with something like fear. Whatever was in that envelope, it was about to change everything, and I wasn't sure I was ready. As Mr. Thompson shuffled the papers in that cramped conference room, my mind drifted back to the years that led to this moment. I was 12 when I first noticed how Grandma's house was more than just a home. It was a battleground. I'd overhear Richard and Linda arguing with Grandma in the kitchen about her spending habits, their voices sharp as they questioned why she'd paid for my summer camp. "She's not your responsibility, Mom," Richard would say, his tone cold. Grandma would snap back, "She's my granddaughter, same as Sarah and Jake." But their words stuck with me, a reminder I was different, adopted, not blood. By the time I was in my 20s, the divide grew. I'd moved to Columbus for college, scraping by on scholarships and part-time jobs at a coffee shop. I'd still drive 2 hours every weekend to see Grandma, bringing her favorite blueberry muffins from the bakery. We'd sit on her porch, sipping tea, laughing about old TV shows. She'd tell me stories about her youth, her eyes sparkling as she described dancing with Grandpa at the county fair. Those moments were ours, untouched by the family's resentment. But Richard and Linda, they'd only show up for holidays, always with a list of complaints. Grandma's roof needed fixing, her car was too old, her savings should be better managed. I saw through it. They were eyeing her estate even then, counting dollars while I was counting memories. When Grandma got sick, everything changed. I was 28, working as a librarian, when she called me crying after a bad fall. I didn't think twice. I packed up my life and moved back to Willow Creek. I took her to every doctor's appointment, cooked her meals, and sat up late with her when she couldn't sleep. One night, she grabbed my hand, her grip frail but fierce. "Haley, you're my angel," she whispered. "Don't let them make you feel small." I promised her I wouldn't, but it was hard. Richard would call, asking about Grandma's bank accounts, pretending to care. Linda once showed up with a realtor, claiming she was just looking at the house for future planning. Sarah and Jake sent texts, but never visited. Emily tried to help, but her job in Chicago kept her away. I was alone, pouring my heart into Grandma's final years while the others waited for their payout. The worst was a Christmas 2 years ago. Grandma was weaker, but she insisted on hosting. I spent days decorating, cooking, making it perfect. Richard's family showed up late, barely acknowledging me. At dinner, Linda made a toast to family, her eyes skipping over me. Later, I overheard her in the hallway, whispering to Sarah, "Haley's just here for the inheritance." I wanted to scream, to tell them about the nights I'd stayed up with Grandma, the bills I'd paid from my own pocket. But I didn't. I kept quiet for Grandma's sake. Now, sitting in that conference room, I wished I'd spoken up. Maybe then they wouldn't feel so entitled to tear me apart. The conference room was suffocating, the air thick with anticipation. Mr. Thompson cleared his throat, his fingers trembling as he opened the envelope. "This is the last will and testament of Margaret Elaine Carter," he began, his voice formal but shaky. My heart pounded so loud I could barely hear him. Richard leaned forward, his hands clasped like he was about to claim a prize. Linda's pen hovered over her notepad, ready to jot down her victory. Sarah and Jake exchanged smug glances. Emily sat rigid, her eyes darting between me and her parents. Susan stared at the table, her face unreadable. Mr. Thompson read the initial bequests. Small sums to the church, a donation to the local library, Grandma's jewelry split between Susan and Linda. Then he paused, adjusting his glasses. "To my son, Richard Carter, and his wife Linda, I leave my antique dining table and $10,000 each." Richard's smile faltered, his jaw tightening. Linda's pen froze, her face paling. 10,000 was nothing compared to the estate's value. Sarah whispered something to Jake, her eyes wide. I held my breath, waiting for my name but dreading what came next. "And to my grandchildren, Sarah and Jake," Mr. Thompson continued, "I leave $5,000 each for their education or future endeavors." Sarah scoffed, crossing her arms. Jake muttered, That's it? The room was a powder keg, ready to explode. Then Mr. Thompson's eyes met mine, and my stomach twisted. As for the remainder of my estate, including my home, savings, and personal belongings, valued at approximately $2 million, he paused, the silence deafening. Richard leaned closer, his eyes gleaming. Linda's lips curled into a triumphant smirk. I felt Emily's hand brush mine under the table, a small anchor in the storm. I named my granddaughter Haley Marie Carter as the sole beneficiary and executor of my estate. The words hit like a thunderclap. Richard froze, his face draining of color. Linda gasped, her notepad slipping to the floor. Sarah let out a sharp, "What?" Jake just stared, mouth open. I couldn't breathe, my mind reeling. Sole beneficiary? Executor? Me? The room spun, their shocked faces blurring. Linda recovered first, her voice shrill. "This is a mistake. She's not even—" Richard cut her off, slamming his fist on the table. "This is outrageous!" he shouted. Mr. Thompson raised a hand, his voice steady now. "There's more," he said, pulling out a second document. My heart stopped. What now? The conference room felt like it was closing in, the air charged with shock and fury. Mr. Thompson held up the second document, a single sheet of paper with Grandma's familiar looping handwriting. "This is a letter from Margaret Carter attached to her will," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. Richard's fist was still clenched on the table, his face a mix of rage and disbelief. Linda's eyes were wide, her mouth open like she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. Sarah and Jake sat frozen, their smugness gone. Emily's hand was still near mine, her fingers trembling. I couldn't move, my heart pounding as Mr. Thompson began to read. "To my family," he started. "If you're hearing this, I'm gone. But I need you to know my heart. Haley has been my light, my caretaker, my true daughter in every way that matters. She gave me love when others gave excuses. I trust her to carry my legacy, not just my possessions, but my values. To Haley, I leave my estate, not because of blood, but because of loyalty. And to those who question her place, know this. She is my chosen heir, and my decision is final." The room went deathly silent. I felt tears prick my eyes, Grandma's words wrapping around me like a hug. She'd seen me. She'd known. Richard exploded first. "This is absurd!" he shouted, standing so fast his chair scraped the floor. "She manipulated Mom! Haley was always there, whispering in her ear." Linda nodded furiously, her voice shrill. "We'll contest this. She's not blood. She can't inherit." Sarah chimed in. "Yeah, this isn't fair." Jake just shook his head, muttering under his breath. Susan stayed quiet, her eyes fixed on the table, but I caught a flicker of shame on her face. Emily squeezed my hand under the table, her voice barely a whisper. "I knew she'd do right by you." Mr. Thompson raised a hand, his calm demeanor unshaken. "There's one more thing," he said, pulling out a small sealed envelope. "Margaret left this for Haley to be read privately." He handed it to me, his eyes kind but firm. She was very clear, no one else is to see it. Richard lunged forward, reaching for the envelope, but Mr. Thompson stepped between us. "That's enough, Richard," he said sharply. "The will is legally binding, and I'll ensure it's executed as Margaret intended." The room fell into an awkward, heavy silence. Linda's face was pale, her hands shaking as she gathered her things. Sarah and Jake stormed out, whispering furiously. Richard glared at me, his eyes burning with resentment before following them. I clutched the envelope, my hands trembling, feeling the weight of Grandma's trust. Later that day, I sat alone in Grandma's living room, the envelope in my lap. The house was quiet now, the casseroles and sympathy cards cleared away. I opened the letter, my hands unsteady, and read Grandma's words. "Haley, my sweet girl," it began. "You were my strength when I had none. This house, this money, it's not the real gift. The real gift is knowing you'll live with the same heart you gave me. Keep loving, keep fighting, and don't let them dim your light." Tears streamed down my face, but they weren't just from sadness. They were from gratitude, from relief, from knowing Grandma had seen me all along. The family didn't take it well. Richard and Linda hired a lawyer, threatening to contest the will. but Mr. Thompson assured me their case was weak. Grandma's letter and her clear intent made it airtight. Susan called me a week later, her voice soft with regret. "I should have stood up for you," she said. "Mom always knew you were special." Emily stopped by, bringing coffee and a hug, promising to stay close. Sarah and Jake sent a half-hearted text, but I didn't expect much from them. The whispers in Willow Creek died down eventually, replaced by murmurs about Grandma's wisdom and my loyalty. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The house, the savings, they were Grandma's way of saying I belonged. I used some of the money to pay off her medical bills and fix up the house, keeping her old record player spinning her favorite jazz records. The rest I set aside for a community project Grandma always dreamed of, a library expansion in her name. It felt right, like I was honoring her heart, not just her dollars. Looking back, I realized this wasn't about the money. It was about family, about who shows up when it matters. Grandma taught me that love isn't owed. It's earned through late nights, quiet sacrifices, and unwavering loyalty. I hope her story reminds you of that too. Hey, thanks for sticking with me through this journey. If this story hit home, drop a comment below. What part got you the most? Maybe you've got your own family tale to share. And if you enjoyed this, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. Let's keep these stories alive together.